It's the silence, followed by the noise. It's the welcoming brew around the table.
And the pounding adrenaline of your first call out.
From a plume of water bursting from the ground,
to being soaked in sweat from the heat.
It's successfully planning an event at short notice, and the pride of pulling on a shirt for the first time.
Today, it's the panic on people's faces.
Tomorrow, it's the support from the communities we serve.
It's feeling anxious about starting a new role, only to be supported and inspired by amazing colleagues.
It's comforting families who've lost loved ones.
And heartfelt thanks from those we have saved.
It's the gravity of shutting down an unsafe business to turning around the lives of vulnerable people.
It's the driving grotto that makes Christmas that little bit brighter.
And the humour that gets you through stressful times.
From training that pushes you to your limits.
Making positive changes and challenging the status quo.
It's feeling excited, included and exhilarated.
Yet having the space to feel vulnerable and exhausted too.
It's the memories that stick with you for life, the good ones and the bad.
It's a great feeling, serving your community.
It's great to be part of something bigger than yourself.
And it's great that no day is the same.
It's all of these things that make us who we are.
It's all these things that make us Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service.
This is me.
This is us. And
this is our story.
Proud to be rated good by HMIC FRS.
It's the silence, followed by the noise. It's the welcoming brew around the table.
And the pounding adrenaline of your first call out.
from a plume of water bursting from the ground,
to being soaked in sweat from the heat.
It's successfully planning an event at short notice, and the pride of pulling on a shirt for the first time.
Today, it's the panic on people's faces.
Tomorrow, it's the support from the communities we serve.
It's feeling anxious about starting a new role, only to be supported and inspired by amazing colleagues.
It's comforting families who've lost loved ones.
And heartfelt thanks from those we have saved.
It's the gravity of shutting down an unsafe business to turning around the lives of vulnerable people.
It's the driving grotto that makes Christmas that little bit brighter.
And the humour that gets you through stressful times.
From training that pushes you to your limits.
Making positive changes and challenging the status quo.
It's feeling excited, included and exhilarated.
Yet having the space to feel vulnerable and exhausted too.
It's the memories that stick with you for life, the good ones and the bad.
It's a great feeling, serving your community.
It's great to be part of something bigger than yourself.
And it's great that no day is the same.
It's all of these things that make us who we are.
It's all these things that make us Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service.
This is me.
This is us.
And
This is our story.
Good morning, welcome everybody to our Nottinghamshire and City of Nottingham Fire and Rescue Authority meeting on Friday the 20th of September here at Joint Police and Fire Headquarters. Welcome to all members and officers present and members of the press and other colleagues attending today who are observing the meeting. I'm going to move straight into the formal agenda, and item 1 on today's agenda is to deal with some issues around membership. So first of all, we've to note that Councillor Nick Rain has been appointed to replace Councillor Gul Khan, and I'm now going to hand over to the clerk to deal with a few other consequential issues arising from that change of membership.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Gul Khan was on the Community Safety Committee, the Human Resources Committee and the Personnel Committee, so we need to agree that Councillor Rain can replace Councillor Gul Khan on those committees. And I've also received an indication from the Vice Chair that she intends to stand down as Chair of the Human Resources Committee, so we will need to appoint a new Chair of the Human Resources Committee.
Thank you to the clerk. So first of all, to note and give our agreement, it's a nomination from the Labour group in terms of Councillor Rain's appointments to replace Councillor Khan on the committees. So I'm just asking colleagues to note and give that an endorsement in the usual way that we would at the AGM, and then I'll deal with the formal bit of business which needs a vote in the room here. So I'm going to ask for nominations for the Chair of the HR Committee. Vice Chair?
I'd like to nominate Nick Rain.
Do you accept the nomination, Councillor Rain?
I do.
A seconder for Councillor Rain? That's seconded by Councillor Fielding. Councillor Lee, I saw you indicate, would you like to speak?
Yes, and can I just confirm that the payments for the position would have stopped when they resigned, and the payments will not commence again until after today when that is taken forward?
Thanks, Councillor Lee. Yeah, so my understanding is that as somebody comes off the Fire Authority, if they are replaced as a member, the allowances will reflect that they no longer serve on the...
I don't mean allowance, Chairman, because they were in a paid position as the Vice Chairman of a committee of a portfolio. As soon as they say they've stopped, their payments will stop at that point, and then obviously we're not paying anybody for that portfolio until the new portfolio is brought on. Can I just confirm that's the case?
Yeah, so if you'd allow me to finish,
if you'd
allow me to finish, Councillor Lee, that is an allowance, and my understanding is that if somebody is no longer on the authority or in a position, they're not in receipt of that particular allowance, and I'll leave that with the clerk to make sure that that is reflected, and that is and that is the case, and the clerk is confirming that that is correct. Are there any other nominations for Chair of the HR Committee? I'm not seeing any other indications. All those in favour of Councillor Rain? All those against? Any abstentions? Okay, that was carried. Congratulations, Councillor Rain, on your appointment as Chair of HR Committee. I think that's everything, Clerk, under that item in terms of membership, isn't it? Thank you. Item 2 then is apologies for absence. Have we any apologies for absence?
Councillors Richard Butler and Robert Corden, and the Police and Crime Commissioner Gary Rodden.
Thank you. Councillor Hollis, do we know if...
apologies for Councillors Drosman.
Apologies for Councillors Drosman. Okay. Any other apologies from anybody? Thank you, they're noted. Item 3 then is declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest by any members or officers in relation to any of the items on today's agenda? I'm not seeing any indications. Item 4 then is the minutes. So it's to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of July. There's been a system error with the pulling through from the system of some of the names of members on the minutes which don't appear on the minutes. It hasn't reflected in the attendance record for members, so those who were here are recorded as correctly here. But the clerk will make sure that those who are not named on the minutes who were present, that's rectified in terms of the minutes. Is everybody content that that's picked up by the clerk outside of the meeting? Any other comments or questions people want to raise in relation to the minutes which are on the yellow pages in our pack? Are people happy that they're a correct record? They're agreed? Yeah. Thank you very much. Item 5 then is Chair's announcements. Just a few brief things to deal with. First of all, in terms of ministerial letters received, the service has received 2 letters from Dame Diana Johnson, MP, recently, who people will be aware is the Minister responsible now for Fire and Rescue Services. These focus upon the culture of the fire and rescue sector and the remediation plans for the buildings following the Grenfell tragedy and issues relating to cladding, and colleagues will have seen the statement by the Prime Minister a few weeks ago in relation to Sir Martin Warwick's further report from the Grenfell inquiry. The service is considering both letters and how they will integrate into current and future plans. Updates will be provided to the Human Resources and the Community Safety Committees, which are the relevant committees, in due course. In relation to the staff survey, the service has recently completed its 2-yearly staff survey. The questions mirrored those asked in previous surveys to accurately benchmark progress, and as a result, 68% of the workforce completed the survey, which shows improvement in all areas measured, which I think is very, very positive. And colleagues should be commended. This reflects the hard work that's ongoing at all levels to ensure the service is an inclusive and healthy environment, and future updates of the actions will be provided to the HR committee as the relevant committee in terms of that work. Members' seminar. Members are reminded of the seminar which will take place on the 31st of January at the rising of the Policy and Strategy Committee to focus on the Community Risk Management Plan, the CRMP, and the financial position of the authority. Obviously that will be in the lead up to our annual budget in February, and by that point we should have had the local government finance settlement, which will detail the amount of resource provided to the authority by central government, and also hopefully the potential level of council tax preset. You should have already received an invite to allow time to plan diaries. As the authority is currently projected to continue financial challenges in the coming years, it's really, really critical that people attend that seminar. In previous years, obviously, it's been a brilliant opportunity for people to scrutinise, ask questions, shape the budget planning for the coming year. So it's really important that people are at that members' seminar, if people can make sure that they're there, please. And then finally, Service Awards night. The Service Awards night will be taking place on the 13th of November at the same venue as it was last year, which is the Crown Plaza Hotel in Nottingham. All members are welcome. It's always an absolutely brilliant night. Colleagues have been invited if they can book tickets to secure their place, presumably through Leanne. Yes, colleagues. The event is always a brilliant opportunity, and it always celebrates the amazing work that is done by colleagues in the Fire and Rescue Service, much of which is reflected in the recent HMIC report, which I think we will touch on later in today's agenda. Are there any comments or questions people want to raise in relation to Chair's announcements? No. The first substantive item on our agenda, then item 6, is the Treasury Management Annual Report. This is a report of the Treasurer, so I think Bev's going to speak to this report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. So this report's a standard report that we receive each year, and it's reporting backwards looking at the Treasury management activity in 23-24. So it reports on compliance with the strategy and the performance indicators that you approved in the strategy in February 2023. So section 2 of the report on page 23 talks about the economic review and economic context that we've been operating in. So in 2.1 it talks about the bank rate for the year. At the beginning of the year it started at 4.25 and it increased during the year to 5.25. It's since then reduced as of the 1st of August, it's now sitting at 5%. Section 2.2 of the report looks at inflation and reports that at the beginning of April 2023 it was 8.7% and reduced significantly during the year to 2.3% in April 2024, and it's now currently at 2.2% as of August 2024. Section 2.5 of the report reports on our capital expenditure activities of the year. So this is aligned with the out-term report that has previously been presented to Fire Authority. And it notes that we spent £7.2 million of capital expenditure, and 6.6 of that was funded by, increased our need to borrow. That increase in the need to borrow then gets reflected in the table that's in just under 2.9 in the report on page 25. In terms of the capital financing requirement, it does note that at the beginning of the year, when we forecast what we expected our capital financing requirement to be, we have increased that due to the capital expenditure, and that's down to the fact that we were expecting capital receipts during the year to fund the capital, and that's been postponed until this year, so that has increased that need to borrow, that capital financing requirement as at the end of the year. And we also had slippage on the programme from the prior year, 22-23, that's increased that capital financing requirement. At 2.2 of the report on page 27, it talks about our investments, and at the investment strategy, and at 2.28 it goes on to our investment activities. So in terms of investments, when we're undertaking that, we consider the security of the money first, then we consider the liquidity so that we get the cash back when we need it, and then we consider the yield that we achieve. 2.33 of the report, 2.32 acknowledges that in the year we had higher balances and higher interest rates, so we overachieved our budget in terms of our investment income, and we achieved 637,000 as opposed to the budget of 374,000. Section 2.36 of the report and the table that's on page 30 reports on the compliance of the set prudential indicators for the year. And by exception, there's nothing to report. We've operated within those boundaries that were set in the prudential indicators and the limits set for the year. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Bev, and thank you for the report. Are there any comments or questions in relation to the Treasury Management Annual Report for 2023-24? Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's just worth noting, I know this is a report that many people generally don't say a great deal on, but I think it's important that we actually commend the team for maintaining a prudent borrowing strategy and utilising internal reserves, which has actually meant we minimise our exposure to high interest rates. But I think we just need to obviously watch and monitor that closely. I think the performance on the returns of 4.74% is commendable, and I think we just need to think about how we enhance that going forward. I think it's really encouraging as well that we actually operate within our prudential indicators. I guess the only concerns I have is concerns obviously over the delays on capital spending, and then thinking about our long-term sustainability, where we might have to switch from internal borrowing to external borrowing. But overall, I think it's an exceptional report. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Bev, did you want to say anything about the capital slippage?
Yeah, I mean it is something we're obviously working on in service as well, and keeping regular monitoring on the capital programme and reporting that through to Finance and Resources Committee. So there'll be a budget monitoring report going to the next committee that will comment on that.
Thank you, Bev. Councillor Turner.
Yeah, Page 27, 2.2, term deposits with English and Welsh authority bodies. Can somebody expand on that, give a bit more information, because I suspect local authorities financially over the coming years will be struggling. Just want a bit more meat on the bones.
So you said 2.20?
2.20,
yeah. Term deposits with English and Welsh local authority bodies. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, what that means is we do inter-authority lending. So generally speaking, authorities lend to each other. So we lend to English and Welsh local authorities. We do obviously look at the authorities we're lending to in terms of their sustainability themselves. So there's some that we wouldn't lend to because we think they're more risky. Or so yeah, we do take that into account when we're considering who we lend to.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Does that satisfy your question?
Yeah, just a bit more information, really.
Councillor Lee?
Just picking up on that, so when we are lending to these authorities, are we getting as much interest back as we would if we were to invest that money?
Yeah, I mean that's part of the investment decision. We'd look at what our options available, so whether it's better to do inter-authority lending like fixed term deposit or what we can get in our call accounts. So that's what we look at before we decide where we're putting money in.
Thank you, Bev. Thank you, colleagues. There are no other questions, so we're asked to note the update on Treasury management activity during 2023-24 financial year as required under the Local Government Act 2003. I'll move the recommendation. Somebody happy to second that? Is that agreed? It's agreed, colleagues? Yep. Thank you very much. That's agreed unanimously. Item 7 then is His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services 2024 inspection findings. This is a report of the Chief Officer, so I think Craig's going to introduce this. I'd draw colleagues' attention to the additional addendum that there is in relation to this item, which is in front of you on your desk.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose, members, there's a report in front of you for public record and for the future. The thing I want to say first is a huge thank you to every single member of staff in the Fire and Rescue Service in Nottinghamshire for getting us here, basically. It's probably one of the proudest moments of my 29-year career so far to get this report. And that's not lost on me, that there's 800 and something people that have got us here. Whether they're working in finance, training, response, fire protection, community engagement, whatever it is they are doing, they are playing their part. And without one of them, the others can't do their job. So for me, it's been I suppose really a bit of a smug week. I've tried to find a different word for it, but it's been a super proud week, and I've been itching to kind of say this to the organisation for the last 5 weeks because there was a delay in getting the report. So from my perspective, and put it on record, I thank every member of my staff for getting us to this point, and I'm going into the weekend with a huge smile across my face, and it's not something I usually have. I'm usually quite a stern-looking individual, but this weekend I'm going to be quite smug and have a huge smile on my face. So referring back to the report, what's interesting in terms of the background section of this time, on this round of inspections, the HMI changed their inspection criteria. They introduced a 5th grade of adequate. And this was really on comments and feedback and how they've developed and matured at HMI, in my words, in so much that good was quite a broad category before, where you could get into the bottom end of good, like just getting in, or how far did you get close to get to outstanding at the top end of good. So in my mind, they've kind of narrowed the good banding and put in the adequate banding. So what's significant, yes, we got 11 goods last time, but good was a lot broader category and more easily able to get into. This time as well, we've now got the good category and it's more difficult to get into. And as the HMI report sort of said, unless they state otherwise, getting adequate doesn't mean you've gone backwards either. So yes, I recognise we've got one adequate, we've kind of taken that one on the chin, and there are 2 or 3 areas I think that we need to tighten up on and learn in the fire protection area. But I've got no doubts in my mind that if they were to come back again in a year's time, we will have dealt with those issues and we would be good. And I'll be as bold as kind of saying that. So to get good on this occasion, and HMI's report that's referenced in the report as well is that they've considered that we have maintained or improved in performance in all areas of the organisation. And from a Chief Officer's perspective, that's kind of bucking the trend, and there's enough detail in the report for you to make some comparisons. So in terms of the total that have been inspected to receive a grading of good in 10 inspection areas, that's great. But there is something like 55% of services have gone backwards in their gradings, although there is still a tranche of services to inspect. And we have been as bold in our comms to say we're one of the best performing fire and rescue services so far in the UK. And I don't want that to be lost. We often don't celebrate things. We often talk, particularly at authority and committees, slippages in capital that the Vice Chair is going to hold us to account over and other things. But I think it's worth noting this is a celebration of a report. There is only one area for improvement. So areas for improvement are where those areas that they particularly feel that we need to focus on an area for improvement. If I go back to our first inspection, we'd got 24. In the last inspection prior to this one, we'd got 4. And on this inspection, we'd got 1. So over a longer term period, this authority can be assured that this fire and rescue service is improving over the longer term. And for me, that plays into the 10-year strategy of outstanding by 2032. So we're on our way. Direction of travel is exceptional. And there is some promising practice mentioned in the report as well, particularly referencing our community advisory group, something again I'm particularly proud of. I feel we've got some promising practices in other areas, but in terms of grading HMI, this is the one they've given us, so we'll take it. And we'll make sure we push hard to give them examples of promising practice next time round as well. Area for improvement then I've kind of referenced, and this is about our ability to assure our risk-based inspection programme to prioritise the highest risks in the built environment. And I know that can quite seem when you read that out, well, given Grenfell and everything else, how can we be adequate? And part of that measure was that we were failed to meet our own target for unwanted fire signals, so alarms in 2 buildings. It's a little bit more complicated how we measure it. We're looking at how we measure it, and there'll be a proposal from myself, probably via David to Community Safety Committee, about how I think we should be responding or not to some buildings, and how much our risk-based inspection programme will start to focus on buildings of highest risk. As I say, it doesn't give me any undue concern at the moment. It is adequate. It's not inadequate. We've got no causes for concern. And it doesn't require improvement. But actually, it's adequate. And in terms of symmetry, it's not 11 goods for me. So I'm certainly not being complacent. Again, in terms of causes for concern, you can see in 2.16, and this just gives you a benchmark across the country. Services did not receive any of those causes of concern, and in round 3, 8 services have received a total of 36 causes for concern. Now, what I would say on that is not all fire services are like for like. You are a combined fire authority in terms of like the status you have. Some are county councils, some are mayoral models. Funding has been different over different years in terms of what we can gain. So not everybody's position is like for like as a benchmark. But again, the important thing for me is we don't have any causes for concern. Moving down through the report then, that's about kind of all I want to sort of say is that we are working hard already. We'll spend the next, I suppose, between now and Christmas understanding the report as SLT. We'll bring further reports. The area for improvement in terms of fire protection will be reported by Damien to Community Safety Committee. And I hope that we can sign that off relatively quickly, because I think we've learned some lessons about areas for improvement and how long we need to keep them open or not. I think as part of public confidence, we need to make sure we close that one as quickly as we can. So, Chair, I commend the report to Fire Authority, and the final thing I do want to sort of say is reiterate is that this is every member of 800 and something staff that has got us here, and I'm superbly proud of them.
Thank you, Chief, and I think you are incredibly right to be proud of the service. This is an outstanding report, and I just want to place on record my thanks to Craig as the Chief, but every single member of the team. It is one team here, and I've said before, and I'll say it again here this morning, that it's one of the best teams I've ever had the privilege to work with, and seeing the way in which people are both willing here to take constructive criticism on the chin and then work to improve, but also the way in which they are so dedicated to the communities they represent in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, I think deserves huge commendation from people here who represent communities right across the city and the county, and obviously represent different political parties and none. So on behalf of the Fire Authority, and as somebody who's very, very proud to be chair of the Fire Authority, thank you to you, Craig, as the Chief Fire Officer, but also thank you to every single member of the team for getting here. The journey from 2018, as Craig says, where there were 24 areas for improvement, where essentially, if we cut to the chase, we were found wanting, we were told that we requires improvement, then to the significant journey that we've gone on through the inspection in 2021, where we were good, where there were only 4 areas for improvement, now to be in a place where we are good across the board, where there is 1 rating adequate, which essentially is good based on the change in grading, and where we only have 1 area for improvement, I think is an absolutely remarkable journey, and has not been achieved without hard work and commitment of everybody. And I think there is one sort of fact of note here. If you look across the 18 other services in the country that have been inspected, there have been 311 areas for improvement issued by the Inspectorate for Constabulary for Fire and Rescue Services. We've received 1 out of those 311. That is a remarkable achievement by public servants here in the Fire and Rescue Service in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire. And I think the other thing that just puts this into stark context is this. This Fire and Rescue Service serves a population across Nottingham and Nottinghamshire of 1.16 million people. It costs about £40.92 for each person who lives in this city and county to run this service, and in return they now know that they've got an absolutely brilliant service that will not only be there for them when they need it in an emergency, but that also is tackling some of the biggest issues that we face in relation to building safety, in relation to making sure that our neighbourhoods are safer, in relation to responding to flooding, but also in relation to making sure that the fire service actually reflects the communities that we represent. And one of the things I was most proud of that was picked out by HMIC, and I'll quote it from the report, is that they specifically noted that this was a positive working culture throughout the entire service, and that's something that I know that people here have worked incredibly hard at. And what sat behind those words in the report is the fact that there are strong values here. You can come to work here and be who you want to be. You will be respected, whatever your background, whatever your sexuality, whatever your gender, whatever your race or religion. And that is really important given some of the challenges that we've seen, not only in the fire sector elsewhere around the country, but also that we've seen in some of the police forces and some of the local authorities around the country. And I think that's something that should be a hallmark and a badge of pride for people who work here in the Fire and Rescue Service. And the other quote I just wanted to lift directly from the report, which I think summarises just how proud people should be. The HMIC said there was a continued improvement in productivity in the service. The service's ongoing efforts to engage with different community groups, consistently achieving a high level of appliance availability, exceeding the national average for similar services, which I think just summarises how well everybody's done. So on behalf of the Fire Authority, I want to say thank you to every member of the team for where they've got to. I think what's brilliant about this report and reflects the ethos of the service is that we're not resting on our laurels. Craig certainly, as the Chief, doesn't see this as a victory declared, a line drawn under the sand, and we move on. We have to constantly strive for excellence. And I also, at this juncture, want to thank some of those in the community who have worked with the service as well. We've got people on the advisory board who have helped us get to this place. We've got colleagues from the trade unions who have always engaged constructively with the service, even in spite of some of the differences we've had when there have been difficult decisions around service reductions. But I also, particularly as Chair of the Fire Authority, want to put on record my thanks to members of the authority currently serving and previously serving, because I think one of the brilliant things about this service is that we have a fire authority where people come together, irrespective of their party politics, collaboratively, and they challenge rigorously, robustly but constructively, holding to account Craig and his team to make sure that they are constantly striving to do better. And the voice that you bring into this room from communities, the angle that you bring into this room from communities to make sure that this service remains relevant is also worth commendation. So thank you to you as members of the authority as well for the role that you have played in relation to getting here. And I hope, Craig, that you will convey to every member of staff on behalf of the authority, I'm sure I've got colleagues agreement for this, our thanks and our congratulations for what is a brilliant result. Are there any other comments or questions people want to make in relation to this report? I've got Councillor Clark and then Councillor Rain, and then Councillor Upton, and then Councillor Turner.
Just very you, Mr. Chairman, the excellent report. I just wondered how we're going to get this out to the public, because there's a lot of bad news going out, particularly on fires, Grenfell and all things like that. So we need to get some, so either Chief, you, or somebody's going to get this out and say, look how well they've done. My second part of the question was public safety through fire regulation. How can we improve on that? Is that through planning? You know, we're all on different authorities. Is that through planning regulation, through a new government that might change that? But we'll get rid of that one a bit there, because I'm not quite... is that all our fault?
Yeah. I suppose on the comms thing, we've got Notch TV in the room. We've just done a short piece outside with myself. What I would say to my news colleagues, whether they're networks, is that we're all very quick to jump on the things that aren't going very well. So I went on local BBC News yesterday, and there's not one thing other than a fire that took place on 4 fire engines and a high-rise platform. There is nothing whatsoever on BBC about what's going well in this fire and rescue service here. So it is a criticism of my news colleagues, because I know news sometimes is bad news, because I wish sometimes we'd write on in this, it's the 10 o'clock bad news, not the 10 o'clock news. So I wish we'd talk about some things that are going well, because I think the public deserve that as much as like what's going wrong down the street. I think people deserve to know, particularly around public sector. It's their money that's paying for me to sit here in front of you today. So I think we are doing something, social media. I'm certainly getting lots of hits in terms of like messages I'm getting from other colleagues around the country congratulating us. So colleagues in the sector are congratulating one another. But I think it is a perennial problem around putting the good message out there. The other thing I sort of said to my chief exec colleagues a while ago, local authority, police, chief constable, is that I think the county deserves something and the city deserves something of good news around its local authorities, whether that be health issues that we're having at the minute, whether it be financial issues across our local authority colleagues. So I think there is a challenge there for members in terms of news, and for myself as senior leaders, to sort of say to our sort of like comms and news colleagues, let's have a bit of balance in the news sometimes. Kind of rant over your more important point, I suppose, Councillor, around the built environment. I wish it was as straightforward as knowing what the silver bullet was. You're talking about many decades of a built environment that's gone through regulation, deregulation, things like building control, approved inspectors, local authority reductions in budgets and capacity. If you look at Sir Martin Moore-Bick's comments, systematic dishonesty across numerous sectors. What I can control is what we can do as a regulator, with the resources I have available to us about what we're going to do about the highest risk. We have got some challenges ahead, and I don't think some of the regulatory announcements, whether it's Judith Hackett in terms of recommendations, whether it's Sir Martin's Phase 1 report or this Phase 2 report, I don't think you're going to see overnight improvements. I think over time, with concerted efforts, and we've got a further report on Grenfell that I'll cover a little bit later in particular. So I think everybody in the part of it's got to come to their work, whether it be suppliers, manufacturers, regulators, local authorities, and be professional and do their work to a high standard. If they do that, I've got some optimism it'll get better. I certainly know the relationship we've got with City Council, the joint audit inspection team. We're now seeing that resurrected, because we have had some bumps in the road, if we're going to be transparent about it. And I think if we want to be convinced about keeping people safe, the many, many thousands of people that use and live in these buildings, I don't want to be named in an inquiry in 10 years' time that I failed in my job. So I think if we're coming to work and doing our jobs properly, achieving the standards we're achieving that the HMI say we're achieving, learning the lessons we should learn, particularly from operations, and every single firefighter, as they interact with the public, have got a role to play in it. So it doesn't quite answer your question. I have optimism, but it's a lot bigger issue than beyond the fire service, but we have to be seen to play our part.
That's what I was getting at, Chair, is that we as local authority members can actually bring some pressure to bear, and yourself now in Parliament can bring pressure to bear, because it seems everywhere in the country. And I was in Bristol last week, you've got tower cranes everywhere, these huge buildings are going up, and and they're close together. Is there any real thought? Now we've got idiots all over the place setting sort of all sorts of devices up. If that went off, we need to be absolutely in there when they're planning the thing to make sure we've got proper surveillance of what is going on. And I know I'm not going to mention some of the buildings in London now, which you would be staggered when I chaired the police authority, that have not got security where we've got blackouts on, from mobile phones to blackouts on the various communication system, and it wasn't considered at all. Thousands, millions of people going through them in all.
Yeah, again, I suppose I have to stay apolitical about these sorts of things, and as Grenfell talks about these sorts of things, I think phase 2, once government have had an opportunity to consider the report, so you won't see lots of recommendations coming from the National Fire Chiefs Council just yet. You won't see me making lots of recommendations just yet, because we're waiting to see if government follow any of the current 50 plus recommendations in the phase 2 report from Sir Martin. So we'll kind of wait and see. My ask will always be, as part of this, I haven't sort of bumped my gums really about resourcing, but if accelerated remediation plans, which are coming in from the Deputy Prime Minister, sent a letter about that, we'll need to see where the ability of a live fire and rescue service in terms of capacity and resource is going to be able to do that. And that'll certainly be my ask, and I'll be lobbying nationally to say, well, we've got these challenges, the built environment's getting bigger and they're getting more complex. We probably need a bit of a hand to help us do that, and we can't turn around and keep saying you need to prioritise your resources locally. I think you'll find we are on the back of our HMI report.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. And yeah, the other thing I think of note, when I was in the chamber for the statement around Grenfell, Sir Martin Morbitt's report and phase 2 of the inquiry, I think what is of note, and I think this is reflected in what Craig says, this is now a personal mission of the Prime Minister. He's absolutely determined that this issue is resolved, and I think the issues you raised, John, are the issues that are right. I think there was shock by people, and it's a point you've made before, that we still don't have a situation where fire authorities, fire services are statutory consultees in planning. It's outrageous, really, given some of the challenge we've had, not just at Grenfell, but elsewhere. And the Prime Minister said very clearly on the floor of the House that he's absolutely determined that those recommendations are dealt with, and obviously they don't cover all of the issues. There are other issues that you've raised as well, John, so we all need to collectively keep the pressure up on this issue, because it is absolutely critical, and unfortunately we have still got people living in buildings where these situations could happen again, at the present moment. I've got Councillor Rain, Councillor Upton, Councillor Turner, and then Councillor Patel. Councillor Rain?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to echo what Chief was saying. I think it's difficult. I was reading this and I was saying to somebody earlier on that it's good to read good news it's good. I've been on the authority now for some years. If you look at it compared to the previous 2 reports, this is superb. It's something to be really proud of. And I've always been, I feel privileged to sit on this authority, really, because the ethos of public service that comes from every single part of our service, the way that we've tackled things, the way that we've looked at issues that are difficult. I've sat on the community safety and the HR committees, and we've gone through things. And I mean, just highlight some of the statistics we've not looked at on page 15, for example. In terms of safety, when you look at home safety checks and you compare our authority, to the average across England, it's way higher, much higher. It's more than a third over that. Similarly, in terms of fire safety audits, much higher. We're spending less money than we are per head of population, even though we've got more densely populated population. And at the same time we've had cuts, etc., we've made real progress, I think. And one thing I'd like to mention, because later on we've got item 9, which is less uplifting, about cultures in fire services across the country. If you look at how we've been involved, and we know we've got a lot to work for in terms of raising values in our culture and diversity, etc., and making real efforts to diversify our workforce and represent it, like you were saying, Chair, that we've got good on it. It's really good to see in terms of what we are doing. We're tackling prejudice, we're making sure that we're a leader in terms of being an inclusive employer, and all there are things to do. I think we should be really proud of that. When you look at item 9, the negative comments, and obviously we have things to address in our service, we've been tackling that head on, and that's credit to the leadership down and our staff that we've done that. So I do think I'm going to go away and promote this report, because under circumstances in public service, the Chief's right, we don't have these good news stories, and the public need to see as well, when they're funding the service, that they are getting outstanding value from people who are really committed to the ethos of public service. Because it's very easy these days sometimes with the news that we get to be quite cynical about why people go into work or what they do, and we've got colleagues here who go over and above because they want to serve the communities that they represent. And I think, speaking first, I'd like to say thank you to all those people. It's a privilege to sit on this body, and I know that we'll go out and promote the excellent report. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Rain, and thank you for your work as well, and the committee's work in relation to the issues around culture and standards in the HR committee. I know that's gratefully appreciated by the service, that they've got the support of elected members in relation to that important work. Councillor Upton.
Thank you, Chairman. I speak on behalf of the Conservative Group. An excellent report, and I think you can all be very proud of it, with no significant causes for concern. I mean, the direction of travel is really good, and I say well done to all the staff, the Chief, the leadership team, and all the staff of the Fire and Rescue authority. But there are always changes, and change does bring new challenges. And for instance, the growth of the electric car batteries and the associated incidents with those in terms of fire risk. So, you know, life changes come and go, but there are challenges facing us. I do hope the new government will review the building regulations. I think yourself or somebody mentioned that just now. And as somebody that's been dealing with the building regulations for the last 50 years or more as a career, I do think that building regulations urgently need reviewing, especially the sections that deal with fire and fire regulations. And I also echo very firmly the point that the Fire and Rescue Service really should, in my opinion, be a statutory consultee on planning issues, and I say that as a cabinet member for planning of the Borough Council at Rushcliffe, and that is an urgency that I would support. Finally, you know, as a minority group here, we do have a role to challenge, and I think that's good, that there are challenges in democracy and forums such as this, and that is a role we accept and we welcome. So thank you, Chairman. Good report, well done.
Thank you, Councillor Upton, and thank you for your support and the way in which your group have engaged. And certainly, you know, I've always welcomed the challenge that is provided by your group and the constructive way in which that has been placed. And I know that's echoed by the Chief as well, so thank you for your comments. And obviously, you speak powerfully with experience about the issues around building regulations, so I think your point would have been heard loud and clear that you made today, Roger, so thank you for that. Councillor Turner?
Congratulations on the achievements. To use a bit of a sporting analogy, I suppose, do we sit now within the Premier League? and I know you said it's very difficult to compare different authorities throughout the UK. But do we sit within the Premier League now? And if so, I hope you're going to keep us there.
Yeah, it's not near Christmas and I'm not in the bottom four, so the board has got the manager's full confidence, kind of thing. I think there's no kind of one measure across where we sit, although we do a bit of an internal number of AFIs, number of goods, adequates and things. We are in the top. We are certainly at the top in terms of that sort of like getting the Champions League places, you know, as it currently stands. Some services have got an outstanding in one of their key lines of inquiry areas. So Staffordshire has been published and they've got an outstanding in terms of response to major incidents, major emergencies. And we'll be having a look at them, see how did they get to their outstanding. I think the line in the sand for me is the fire protection one needs to get to good. It needs to be good to provide that symmetry, because part of the OCD in me is I need that kind of symmetry in my mind. And then we'll sit down with the report and sort of say, where do we think? And we'll work with HMI Service Liaison team and sort of say, how close in some of the goods do we think with some effort we can get to outstanding? And I think what I would love to see on the next one is we get 1 or 2 outstandings. You know, I don't want us to go backwards. That's the important thing. We consolidate our position in the league. That's the first and foremost, is stay in the league because that's where the money is. All the plaudits are, the money's not necessarily there. My view rating is we're certainly in the Champions League places, to continue with your sporting analogy. It's going to take a lot of work. It may mean a lot of resource to get to outstanding, and I may have to make a judgment in some areas. With your advice to yourselves is that it's not worth the money to get that grade in. You know, maybe we are with the resources we've got, with the environment we've got, with the geography we've got, well where we are, but we're certainly up there. You know, and I'm proud to say that, you know, and whether I've got other chief colleagues that see this on video or YouTube or not, well, you know, don't criticise me for my pride in my service. Chase me and get there yourselves.
A competitor, definitely.
Yeah.
Yourself.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Thanks, Chief. Councillor Patel.
Yeah, first of all, congratulations. This is really good news for the entire authority, and I'd like to thank each and every member of the team. As a new member, I think this is very good news story for me, and I think the journey has been constructive since 2018, but in my opinion it's been ambitious as well, and I think that's been the driving force from producing from 24 to coming down to 1. I think that's really, really commendable. I don't want to spoil the mood in the room. However, on page number 27, it says that the service is struggling to reduce the unwanted fire signals, and it's to do with the guaranteed out-of-hours services. I just want to ask have we got any data around this? And is there any analysis which will help us to tap on the trends that are going on with regards to unwanted calls? And do we have adequate staff funding? Because it says here that it is going to encourage the service plans to implement a rota for qualified staff. So do we have adequate staff, funding and resources for out-of-hours provisions? And what will be the wider impact of this?
Yeah, I'll give you a bit of an overview and Damien will come in and think. Unwanted fire signals are quite different now, so we'd imagine them as like, hospitals, large buildings and things, but we're seeing a growing amount of unwanted fire signals in domestic properties. So people who are vulnerable in their homes who have now got these automatic alarms. So we're going to have to deal with how we record, so we're clear about is it domestic settings or is it the built environment where we have enforcement powers, because of course in somebody's domestic home is their castle, we don't have the powers that we would have as a regulator in those settings. So there is something we're going to have to deal with on that. I think there is something more that there's going to be something I asked Damien to bring back to authority really that I've asked before about maybe some properties we do not respond to. Because the risk isn't there, the system is there, the use is there, and it might be times of day, location. So there is an ambition from me where some other services do, where you'd see that go down quite a number overnight. But if Damien, you want to come in with some of the kind of like the more detail over it.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. Thank you, Councillor. So there is a report specifically on this coming to the next Community Safety Committee that was already planned, and we've been working with members on the Community Safety Committee for the last 2 years, really, specifically looking at this area. There is a challenge, but that challenge and the mitigation of the risk is a fine balance. I think we'll continue to work with that, but it's definitely going to be an area of focus for us in terms of that. Regarding the out-of-hours provision, realistically, we are looking at funding deficit next year, so all of our choices have to have an impact somewhere, so we will be looking at that. But we've got robust plans in place. We're working closely with our colleagues, with the representative bodies, and looking what other fire and rescue services do to make sure we have that 24-hour provision. So we're very, very close. I think the next couple of weeks that will be implemented. The HMIC reflect that in their report that they're pleased that we've got that plan in place. But just thanks to the staff that are stepping forward to do that, because without them we wouldn't have that provision. So there is a compromise there. We have to choose where we prioritise it, but that is a really important area. We need to make sure we've got those staff available all times for that fire protection issue.
If I could just add on the people things, Councillor, about the Fire and Rescue Service has got sort of very strong heritage in terms of like terms and conditions and contractual issues and things. We're going to have to work through that and find some way of dealing with that with kind of staff, and that'll be a compromise, I'm sure, on all sides along the way. I will go on record and sort of say, if when it goes wrong and somebody asks me later, so just because you couldn't negotiate a terms and conditions of a contract was the reason the public suffered, that kind of thing, I do not want to be in that position, and that's something about how does this look in the Daily Mail in 18 months' time on the front page of a paper. In the face of it, in hindsight, some of these things seem very, very simple to deal with. The clearest thing for me is what are we responding to that creates a demand for us, and what's the money that we want, where do we want to put our money? And I've been very clear to Damien around prevention and protection are the two areas where I do not think we can look to sort of compromise, and we have to look at smarter ways of doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patel. Any other comments or questions? No. The recommendations are on the report, which is that members note the outcome of the HMIC FRS inspection report and the progress made by the service, acknowledge the area for improvement highlighted by HMIC FRS, and approve governance and scrutiny through the Fire Authority Community Safety Committee. And thirdly, I'm going to add an additional recommendation, which I'll leave the clerk to tidy the wording up on, but in essence to request that the Chief Fire Officer writes to all members of staff on behalf of the Fire Authority to congratulate them on an outstanding result in relation to the latest HMIC FRS inspection. So I'll move those recommendations. I'll pick up the wording for the third recommendation with the clerk outside of the meeting. Is somebody happy to second those recommendations? Seconded. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, and congratulations again to everybody on a brilliant result from the inspection. Item 8 then on our agenda today is the Community Risk Management Plan for 2025 to 2028, and this is going to be introduced by ACFO Sharman.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, councillors. This report, as stated, is to present the draft Community Risk Management Plan for 25 to 28 and to seek a member's approval to undertake the necessary consultation. As members will be very much aware, the National Framework for England, which sets out the expectation on fire authorities by the current government, states and stipulates that a fire and rescue authority must have a community risk management plan. Essentially, the community risk management plan is a high-level business plan. It is the strategic plan of the authority, and it's how the authority will meet public's expectations and the needs of the public, and it sets out the service's mid-term priorities and how it will deliver to meet those community needs. The current plan runs until March 2025, so thereafter, and the reason of the report today is that we will be required to publish another community risk management plan from the 1st of April. The National Framework document details that the plan will cover for a minimum duration of 3 years. I won't go into in all the detail or cover every page of the plan. For those members that were able to attend the member seminar that we ran recently, they were very much aware of the contents of the plan, and we've also got a hyperlink that's detailed on 2.9 that will take you directly to the plan. Some of the critical areas of the plan that I do want to set out is the strategic assessment of risk, and as Councillor Upton very much spoke about earlier, is that the risk and the challenges that face the fire and rescue service are ever evolving and they are ever changing, and we as a fire and rescue service must be able to adapt to be able to meet those challenges. So one of the things that we do on a 3-yearly basis is we look at that strategic assessment of risk, and what that essentially is we look at the risk that the community faces. We then look at that risk and we layer it over what resources we've got and how we are meeting those particular challenges, whether it be from a prevention point of view, protection point of view, or how we respond to those incidents. To be able to do that, we engage with an independent specialist company, and they undertake the review independent and report back to us how we are essentially how are we set up over the next few years, how are we able to meet those risks. That forms a critical part of our community risk management plan as we move forward. The community risk management plan forms part of the long-term ambition, and it's just been talked about that we do strive to be one of the best fire and rescue services in the country, and we do strive, and our intention is to be outstanding by 2032. To ensure that we've got a consistent approach, the CRMP is based around 6 strategic priorities that are detailed in 2.6. I'm not going to go through each one of them. These are the same 6 strategic priorities that are in your current CRMP. We feel that they provide the level of clarity and direction, so we will maintain, or we are seeking to maintain, those 6 strategic priorities. One of the important parts and the reason for the report is we are seeking the approval for consultation of the draft CRMP. We do seek the support of members to use your experience in terms of your representation in the community to support us as part of this consultation. In previous years, we've employed or we've sought the expertise of an external consultancy company, but based upon members' feedback, we've decided that we feel for value for money that we will undertake our own consultation this time round. Essentially, the consultation will be run over a 9-week period. It starts on the 30th of September and will run till the 1st of December. Detailed within the report from 2.3 to 2.15 talks about how we will go about that consultation, some of the objectives of the consultation, and also the various different approaches. The consultation was based around the 6 strategic priorities, but there are additional questions in there that we feel that we need to prioritise and make improvements on. One of those, as questioned by Councillor Patel, is we will be focusing on asking questions around our approach to dealing with unwanted fire signals. The outcome of the consultation will be presented to Fire Authority in February 2025. And we will look then to obviously move forward the CRMP and be looking for implementation from the 1st of April. Chair, that's us.
Superb. Thank you, Mick, and thank you to those colleagues who were at the members' seminar and fed into the working up of this consultation on the CRMP. Any other comments or questions people want to raise in relation to the report? Councillor Patel?
Yeah, thank you so much for the report. It's just to make a note that I hope, I welcome the consultation, but I just hope that people whose first language is not English, that is taken under consideration.
It is, Councillor Patel. Thank you.
Councillor Upton?
Just a small point on 2.10, page 35. I welcome the fact that you have the confidence and the resources to do it in-house. I mean, there's no information that I can see on what is saved from having an external consultant, but I'm sure every penny counts. So, yeah, good. Pleased to hear that.
Thank you, Councillor Upton. Councillor Lee?
Just picking up on what the council said, what languages do we translate into, just out of context?
I couldn't tell you offhand, but there is a plethora of different languages that we have as part of our consultation process.
The reason I mentioned that, Chairman, is something I've found out recently, is in my community in particular, we have a massive concentration of Hong Kongers that have come from Hong Kong. I mean, a massive community. So I myself have started putting out my leaflets in traditional Chinese as well, and it's just something that I wasn't aware of. If I wasn't aware of it, I'm going to guess some other people weren't aware of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and that feedback, that sort of feedback is really helpful, Councillor Lee.
Bingham and Newark,
basically. Yeah. And similarly in Gedling as well. Councillor Winter?
Thank you, Chair. I think for members who actually weren't able to attend the members' seminar, I think it would have been an opportunity to take some time out to actually go through the document. I think it actually provided a real depth and background as to the community risk management plan. I think the strategic goals that we're going to continue to, I think, have served the fire authority well. And it's good that we're actually aligning the fire standards and the community risk management I think is commendable. I guess my specific question is about, we've talked about the issue of language, but what about digitally? I think how are we going to actually ensure that that we actually still reach those who are excluded digitally? And I think, obviously I think the consultation that we can do in-house is interesting, but can we elaborate on how that's going to provide greater community reach?
Yeah, if I can try and answer that, because we're very conscious about the communities of Nottinghamshire, and there is not one size that fits all. So there will be an approach, whether that be through digital engagement or paper questionnaires, that will be available, so we can reach a broad plethora of individuals. Where we feel that we can advance on previous consultations is that we have a direct audience, as already been alluded to and as detailed in the the HMIC report. We undertake 15,000 safe and well visits. With that, they are the users of our service. They are our communities, and if we overlap our engagement with our direct contact with our communities, that is where we feel that we'll be in a far stronger place than an external company, bringing an external company in and running small number of events. So we feel through our networks and our community contacts, it will be more robust and more meaningful council.
Brilliant, thank you, Nick.
If I can just add, as I've come back from a week off last week, I was able to see this week a consultation plan that's provided by the team that supports me. So I think we've sent you the In2 People report that we had done, which was around community groups in the city, and that is mentioned in the consultation plan about accessing those groups within the city specifically. And they are a lot of groups where we've had difficulties maintaining and sustaining contact with. So I've got confidence at the minute, Councillor, that yes, some of those groups will feed into the digital thing. I think will always be an issue to us, particularly where we've stated as a fire authority we want to be digital first as an approach because of our impact Goal 6 on your strategic goals is environmental sustainability. Part of that is the environment, and that's difficult if you're on that sort of cusp of, I quite like technology but don't like too much of it. But I've got confidence in the consultation plan that I've seen this week that's come with the team to kind of make sure we use the communities we serve to give us a view about what they think about us.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move the recommendations, colleagues, which are on page 33 of the agenda pack, which is that members approve the content of the draft Community Risk Management Plan for 2025 to 2028, and that the approach for consultation on the draft CRMP for 2025-28 is approved as well. I'll move the recommendation. Somebody have a second? That's seconded. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you, Mick, for presenting the report. Item 9 then is His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services Standards of Behaviour report, and this is going to be introduced by Mick.
Thank you again, Chair. As members very much aware, and as started by the Chair in terms of his announcement, is the culture of the Fire and Rescue Service and the standards of behaviour remains very high on the agenda for central government. It's always remained high on your agenda, and you've made that very clear to us as senior leaders within the organisation. The HMIC Inspectorate carried out both a data and survey and a thematic inspection process, and as a result of that they've produced a report in terms of standards and behaviours. What the report does, it gives a brief overview of a summary overview of some of the findings, and this also sets out the steps that the service will be taking to address those recommendations. Just briefly, I think it's worth reminding where and why we are in this position. Is following the reports of misconduct and the independent cultural review into London Fire Brigade, the Minister of State commissioned the HMIC to undertake a spotlight report into values and culture. This further report is complementary to the previous report, and the HMIC carried out research through staff surveys, which we participated in, the collection of various different data sets that we obviously fed into. They also chose to do 10 thematic on-site inspections. I'd like to reiterate that Nottinghamshire was not one of those fire and rescue services that they chose to inspect. And as they talk about the report, I think, as Councillor Rain pointed out, we have to look at it in the context of other information and the other reports that we have, and as previously mentioned, the most recent HMIC inspection report on our service. Detailed in section 2 of the report really gives some high-level summary of findings, some of the details and some of the points that are stressed within the report. And it's really from a professional that loves working in the fire and rescue service. This is really, it's disappointing. And we are, whilst I've talked about we need to look at it in the context of how we are performing, I want to give assurances that we won't be complacent regarding this. We still recognise we have areas for improvement. We still recognise that creating that positive culture is not something that you achieve. You continually strive for that ambition to have an outstanding culture. Just briefly, just highlighting some of the findings. HMIC have identified they are still finding an unacceptable level of inappropriate behaviour across the sector. They report that staff are still experiencing misconduct. They are very critical of the watch culture, pointing out the negative watch culture. A point of note here, I wish they'd also point out the positives of some of the watch cultures as well, but for the purpose of the report, they point out the negatives of the watch culture. They constantly challenge and point out inadequate training for those undertaking investigations into misconduct cases or investigations, and they are very critical in terms of the scrutiny of the misconduct of cases, pointing out that they believe it's ineffective. The report really breaks down to 15 recommendations that we must take into consideration. Those recommendations are contained within Appendix A attached to the report, where they cover 4 broad areas: the culture of the Fire and Rescue Service, the extent in which the services are identifying misconduct, the effectiveness of misconduct processes, and sharing and learning those lessons from those misconduct processes. The recommendations, one of the recommendations is for immediate implementation. The other recommendations are time-framed over the next 12 months. The service has now received the report and is working through the report and trying to analyse each of the recommendations and work out what does this mean to us in a local context. And as already been spoken about, we have very recent staff survey results, we have recent inspection results, so we're going to cross-reference all that level of data and we'll feed it into the action plan and determine where we believe the priorities are and what actions need to be undertaken. It's recommended that we take this process and the recommendations via the Human Resource Committee to achieve that consistency in approach. Internal scrutiny will be achieved by the CRMP Assurance Board, which is chaired by the Chief Fire Officer. Chair, 2.9 onwards talks about the local context, but we have spoken a lot today about the local context in terms of our culture and our positives, but at the same time not being complacent. So I'm happy to leave it there and take questions, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Mick, are there any comments or questions in relation to the report? Councillor Ray?
Yes, and I'll mention some of the stuff further. I mean, it's difficult, the subject, isn't it, reading it. And I just reiterate what Mick's saying is that this wasn't our service that was looked at. We're not being complacent about it. We're all aware of the context with the Metropolitan Police, other services, etc., what's happened, and if behaviour and conduct is unacceptable in the public sector. We are doing our best to tackle that. And I think we should again reiterate for people watching, everybody here, that if you look at our report, it does show the sort of things that we've been doing that made improvements. But we're not complacent. And the Chief said here before, we've talked to our staff networks, that if people are bullying, harassing people, or have offensive or bigoted opinions, they're not welcome in the club. We are going to get, we are doing something about it. We are changing. We're a progressive organisation. I think we're very proud of that. I mean, within that, obviously, there are some sensitivities. I understand in terms of misconduct, I'm a trade unionist myself, that there are some issues around this and what we look at and what constitutes misconduct and sometimes the culture, particularly in small groups or in watches, that can take more, it can be more difficult to challenge. I mean, I know also, and I was going to ask Mick about it, it's controversial in terms of recommendation 9, the DBS checks. Now, I know as councillors on the city, we have DBS checks and people represented teachers do, because obviously we have access to vulnerable people, etc. We're going into buildings, and it can cause worry amongst people. If you're doing a check like that, you're pulling stuff out to the police. It's just like when you drive and you've got a police officer behind you, you've done nothing wrong, there's nothing wrong with your car, but you are worried about things. And I think there are sensitivities around that. I know Mick, and hopefully working with the trade unions, I wanted to ask you about that and perhaps reassure members that we're not looking at everything they've ever done that might be a minor infraction when they were 16, but we are looking to avoid the sort of employment practices without going into it that's happened in other services in other parts of the country where people have been employed and committed really quite serious and grave offences that could have been weeded out had we had a DBS check. So I know it's controversial, I just wondered your thoughts on that and how that's progressing.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. DBS is one mechanism for carrying out pre-employment or continual employment checks. It is not the silver bullet to weeding out people who should have been working for public sectors, but as we're all very much aware from high-profile cases that have occurred predominantly within the police services, that we need to be able to feel confident and assured that we have the right public service working for the authority, and DBS is part of that process. We have a process in place. We've worked very closely with the trade unions because of there is a number of concerns, and quite rightly people are concerned, and generally they are concerned not because they've committed some sort of heinous crime, but they are concerned about privacy, they are concerned about maybe something that they've done of a minor nature that was some years ago that has nothing to do with their suitability to be working for the Fire and Rescue Service. So we've worked very closely with the trade unions to agree a process And the process will actually take 3 years. It will take 3 years for us to get through the whole employment cycle and the process in terms of which we go through. But we've got not only a process for undertaking those checks, but also responding to those checks. And an agreed process with the trade unions about what do we do when this type of information comes back, how do we assess that information, how do we determine the level of risk that presents the organisation, whilst working with the trade unions and making sure that it is very much compliant with employment legislation.
Chief?
Yeah, my understanding is, Councillor, we're going for a higher standard and a lot of other services are going as well, Mick. I think we're still going we're actually doing enhanced checks. And that isn't a requirement, and that's been a lot of conversation with our trade union colleagues. I think there was some wording in a previous draft of a policy or procedure that, it was a particular sticking point, and I believe that we've addressed that wording because we have to be proportionate and reasonable. I think you talked about something we may have done when we were 16 that I'm now 50 whatever, and does that really matter anymore? I've been a good upstanding citizen hopefully for all that time. So like I said, on lots of things there's a lot of compromise and discussion and negotiation. We've got the industrial relations we've got here for a reason. We're able to fall out about things in a reasonable manner, still have a cup of tea at the end of the argument about something. And I think that will always be important to me, having seen what industrial relations were like some years ago, as an official myself some years ago, and now as a Chief Fire Officer, watching what's actually worked along that way. And we've still got fallouts to come, I'm sure, but we'll do that in a proper way. But we've managed to get enhanced checks in this service. Some chiefs are talking about, well, am I going to assess these people? My responsibility, I think, is to give the public the confidence and assurance that they think, well, at least we've had this check. Mick's point is right, it's one way of doing it. And also give to every member of staff in this organisation that they've all been through a rigorous check and they're here on their merit, or there's no concerns and issues. So there's that internal assurance and that external assurance as well. I think, just picking on a couple of things in the report, the HMR's report talks about negative watch cultures. I see lots of positive watch cultures, I see negatives as well on some watches in some places. And I think in terms of performance management now, we're starting to see newer generations of staff coming through, understand what performance management is. We're starting to see complaints raised and concerns raised. Although we still have, even on our staff survey, I think it said that quite a number of staff still don't know we've got a say-so confidential reporting line. Believe it or not, as senior leaders, we get complaints about us. And I have to have faith that actually it's going to be dealt with properly. They whatever level, firefighter, administrator, chief fire officer, these cause concern. And I think we've got some learning to do about how quickly and how we deal with concern, so it reduces the anxiety on the individuals affected, both the victims and the perpetrators sometimes, until justice is seen. We are not, this is something I keep sort of saying since London Fire Brigade had the level of transparency with the Commissioner Andy Rowe. We are not London Fire Brigade, we are not Dorset and Wiltshire, we are not these 10 services, but I know as a Chief Fire Officer I have some of these issues in this service. I'm not going to be complacent about it. We are not those services, but we have people and we have systems and processes that might let people down still because there's gaps in them. So again, as part of our values and everything else, my assurance is the team are on it. We've got a people review that is going to be taking place or has started, or we're going to do that as part of the ongoing review of the service that will look at systems and processes as well. And I've had a conversation particularly with the Fire Officers Association and the FBU only a couple of weeks ago, where questions were asked about, what's my view about the recommendations in the report. There are some things I agree with wholeheartedly. There are other things I think maybe not apply in the way that their recommendation is written. And that might cause the HMR some frustration as well, in terms that they're an inspector and can make recommendation. They're not a regulator, but they have asked to be a regulator. And that is a space to watch.
Thank you, Craig. Councillor Patel.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for the report. And for someone who's worked in the prison, we always did share a joke amongst ourselves that walls have ears. So I totally understand that how difficult, but at the same time challenging it must be for all those who are dealing with these issues and trying to continuously improve and engage. So I firstly want to thank all the team for the work that they're putting into, have the constant engagement and improvement in the fire services. I just want to know, with recommendation 24, there is the service is looking at developing and seeking a cultural dashboard. Do we know who would have access to to the cultural dashboard, and is there any reassurance or assurance on confidentiality, especially to the underrepresented groups, about this?
Thank you for the question. The dashboard is it's in its inception at the minute. We hopefully will have a live dashboard by the start of the new CRMP. The cultural dashboard initially will be accessible by senior leaders within the organisation, and as we develop that information and we feel that information can be used constructively to drive change and challenges, that information will become more accessible. Over a period of time, we do want the information to be accessible by all within the service. Additionally, we also have an ambition to make that dashboard also accessible to our communities as well. Improve the amount of data and the accessibility to that information on our external website. The development of the dashboard it's been delivered and has been achieved through consultation with our network groups, which obviously is a broad plethora of individuals in that groups, including minority groups.
Thank you, Mick. Let's answer your question, Councillor Patel.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Lee and then Councillor
I just wanted to pick up on something Councillor Rain said. It is true that councillors are DBS checked, but you will know as I do, not all councillors are DBS checked. I'm just putting this out there for people that are listening. Not all councillors are DBS checked, but even when you run, as everybody here knows, you don't need a DBS to run as a councillor. Even after you are elected, if the DBS picks up anything, all it is a risk assessment. They can't ban anybody after they've been elected unless it picks up on two criteria, financial and the other case. However, DBSs don't mean anything after you're elected. The only reason I'm raising it is people listening will think, as I did and you did before we were elected, that all councillors are DBS checked before they run as a council. That's not true. Now, a lot of parties, including the Labour Party and Conservative Party, will do our own checks. If an individual wants to run as an independent or non-aligned, it's up to them to, if they want to put their name to us. I just don't want the general public or people in this meeting to think councillors are DBS checked before they run, because that's not the case. And you can't be deselected after a DBS check is done. It's literally just a risk assessment by that local authority to see if there's anything they need to be aware of. But nobody can be sacked after a DBS check unless it picks up on two criteria. And I just wanted to say that in the public realm, just for anybody listening.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Robertson.
Yes, page 42, item 210. On the assumption that the staff survey is voluntary, I welcome the response rate has increased up to 68%, which is in the right direction. And the last line in that paragraph, it's sort of saying 82.3% of the 68% response rate agreed or strongly agreed that they felt included and welcomed at work. I'd rather like also information, presumably there was an option to tick if you did not feel included and welcomed at work. So it's the other side of the coin would be interest me more than those that satisfied. Were there any that tick the box? No, we're not. I don't know. But there we are, just an observation.
Just one very quick response, if I can, on that one. So, yeah, thank you, Councillor Upton. I mean, the survey report is undertaken and facilitated by an external company whose name escapes me. Just forgot who it is. But in terms of the presentation that was presented back to us, to say that I'll put it as I mean, any service or any company that achieves that level of satisfaction in terms of 82% needs to be really proud. They need to be really proud and you know and he works across a number of sectors, and he stressed how positive that we should feel about the survey results. After the meeting, in terms of the Strategic Inclusion Board, we will have a short presentation which will cover some of that detail. We can provide further information. I would suggest probably the Human Resource Committee is probably the place to present that more detailed report. But after this Fire Authority, the closing of the Fire Authority, there will be a short presentation as part of the Strategic Inclusion Board.
Thank you, Mick. Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Chief?
Yeah, just Councillor, just on the my issue isn't the 82%, it's the issue of the 32% that didn't complete the staff survey. Even though 68% is, we've been told we're right up there in terms of, I've got public bodies that are telling me 18% of their staff have completed. To get above 50%, apparently, you're doing incredibly well. And I've sort of said on my staff briefings and things, I think every 68% of the workforce has done it. The challenge for leaders at all levels is, because there may be some leaders that didn't do the staff survey as well, by the way. The challenge is to, what happened to the 32% then? Were they poorly, unable, absent during the time that was open? Have they got concerns about confidentiality? Have they got concerns about what's the point of saying anything because nothing ever changes around here, which is not true, but that's a perception some people have. So we've got to work on the 32% that didn't complete it, and then maybe it's still 82% of the 94%, but we've got a third of the organisation that didn't complete it.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to move the recommendations, which are that we note the contents of the report and we agree to receive further updates by the HR, the Human Resources Committee. I'll move the recommendations. Are they seconded? All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Mick, for introducing that report. And the next item, item 10, is our annual report of information governance, which is also going to be introduced by Mick and is on page 53 in your agenda pack.
Thank you, Chair. This is a standard annual report, and it's the request of a Policy and Strategy Committee back in 2017 that we bring an information governance report annually to Fire Authority. As detailed in 1.6 of the report, the report's it's a very basic overview of freedom of information request, environmental information request, data protection areas of interest, and the regulation of investigatory powers, otherwise known as RIPA, activity. I'll jump straight into the report and take members to page 55 and talk about the freedom of information requests. As you'll see, as stated in paragraph 2.3, we've had 142 freedom of information requests, and how that compares against previous year is detailed within the graph. Out of those requests, we responded to 95% of those requests within the statutory time limit, which is an improvement on previous years and also well above the Information Commissioner's target. In terms of environmental information request, we had one information request that we believe were environmental information, and we responded to that request within the statutory time period. In terms of data protection, just to give assurances, we take the protection of individuals' data very seriously, and we're always working hard to adapt and to meet the challenges that are continually evolving around personal security and GDPR regulations. When we keep an individual's set of data, obviously individuals have a right to be able to request what data we hold on their behalf. We've had 43 requests over the past, during period 23-24. And we also have no incidents of recording where we have to report a breach in terms of data protection, which we are statutorily required to do to the Information Commissioners. Again, I stress that we had no reports or no requirement to do that during 23-24. In terms of the Investigatory Powers Act, we've had no applications to use that act, so there's nothing to report in terms of that use of that legislation. Very quick run over the report there, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mick. Any comments or questions on this report? Councillor Clark?
Yeah, just a quick one, Chair. Really, it's a nudge to you that hopefully the new government will look at how this legislation is used. I mean, I welcome it. I think the press do really well with it, but we have those people that are actually on, at every level of authorities, really continually complaining or FOIing, and he is taking massive sums of money across the country. Yeah, not against freedom of information, but I hope the government really looks at it to see how it can tail a persistent amount of
letters, emails, etc. we get from certain people in the community.
Thank you, John. I know it's a point you've made before as well, and that obviously those vexatious FOIs or complaints, can be costly to the taxpayer as well, and it has to be balanced, doesn't it, about transparency, but also protecting taxpayers' money, as you've said. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think it's just to acknowledge it is a positive report and the direction of travel, clear improvements. But given the digital information and smart data bill, how are we preparing for those changes of the governance arrangements?
Yeah, we're working with our internal team to be able to prepare for the legislative changes. We have a process in place where we have a protective security group that provides that scrutiny and that support to be able to, in terms of bringing that new regulations on board. The protective security group meets on a quarterly basis and is chaired by myself. The challenge is it's how we get that specific resources to ensure that we meet those requirements. There is significant change within both data protection and the management of information currently. And as members will be aware, we received a high level of assurance from our last audit process around data management and the management of individuals' data. But that does not mean that we've not got lots to do in terms of preparation for new regulation.
Thank you. Thanks, Mick. Thank you, Vice Chair. I'm going to move that we note the contents of the report. Colleagues have to note the report. That's noted. The next item on our agenda, item 11, is the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 2 report, and this is going to be introduced by the Chief.
Thank you, Chair. As the report, the first thing it sort of says in terms of how long ago that was now, sort of 7 years ago, as Martin Moore-Bick says, the avoidable loss of 72 people and the countless others that have been affected by it. And a lot of the process around the inquiry has been dealt with. So a lot of things like civil claims, including members of the London Fire Brigade, the responders on the scene in terms of the trauma that has left both physically and mentally. A lot of that may have been getting dealt with as a process now, but it'll be felt for many, many years. And again, that's not lost on me as a Chief Fire Officer that, I accept and understand that I put people in harm's way every single day as part of my job. If anybody saw as well, Sir Martin Moore-Bick and his two colleagues in terms of presentation and summary of his thing, it was sort of, an incredibly sobering and chilling kind of like presentation, how he delivered that, and what that kind of meant, and his colleague, to watch his colleague get physically upset as she was delivering her aspect of the failures around sort of like, architects and all those kind of things over a number of years. It really reminded me about the sort of, I suppose, the importance and the gravity of the report. This report in front of you today really is to put it on your radar, just like we did with the Phase 1 report, and that we are taking it absolutely seriously. As I said a little bit earlier, we're not looking to make recommendation about what the service should run away and do yet, because we are waiting for government response, but there are still things from Phase 1 and from the report that we are looking at. So we're working our way through the 2,000 pages. I myself, I've only been through, because of the week's leave, I've only been through the exec summary, the recommendation section, and I'm starting to work my way through the report. It also doesn't name the Fire and Rescue Service in the report. It names London Fire Brigade, but you can quite easily read across to make sure that there are assurances right across the sector that the Fire and Rescue Service is doing its job properly within the resources it's got. And as I said a little bit earlier as well, it's becoming more and more challenging in the built environment, and resources is an issue to make sure that people are complying. Sometimes you're not dealing with an individual when it comes to buildings. You're dealing with an equity company that's offshore. You're dealing with somebody at scene who's a caretaker of the building but not the responsible person. So all these factors together are complicated, and I actually commend the inquiry for getting here, as much as it's been a long time, with the complexity. I think they've had something like over 500 people contribute to the inquiry, or 500 bodies, and of course there's still a process to go on after this. I think there's something like 50 plus individuals that are named in terms of police investigation and 19 organisations that are named in police investigations that may be going forward to the CPS for consideration. So this is going to rumble on for quite some time. But again, in first and foremost, it's a human tragedy, and that's exactly why I'm here as a public servant, to serve the public. Part 2 of the report gives you a breakdown. There's obviously a hyperlink in the report. I also wrote to you, I think, as members around, this is now out. What are we doing about it? I've got a draft that's going to all of your chief executives and chief execs around the city and county, and that's because I want to make sure they are aware of their responsibilities in terms of advising you and your local authorities, and assure myself that they are taking it seriously, and certainly within the local resilience forum around some of the things that out of Grenfell and otherwise, there'll be some things that we have to kind of deal with there, a little bit like we have with Manchester Arena and things as well. There'll be things that tip over. So where a local authority, where it has a major incident, for example, in a building, we're able to use a decant protocol at the moment, which means that we are able to, in our powers, basically prohibit use of the building, for want of better words. I mean, somebody will correct me on my terminology, I'm sure, but effectively, I could, decant everybody out of Victoria Centre flats. What issue does that then cause the local authority about housing? And a conversation I've had with Damien about something around remediation we've already got ongoing. We've had a bit of a response back, and again, it's not quote about the concern about where do we put people if we have to rehouse them. Well, where do you put them if they die in a fire, is my response. I'm less interested in where local authorities want to put people because there's a prohibition issue. I'm more interested in making sure that we don't lose life that's avoidable to lose, and I don't want to be on that inquiry. So there's some really huge things that I'll be writing to chief execs. I will be writing, and then we have a chief execs meeting anyway, where I'll want to agenda it and just have a discussion about what the concerns around my chief exec colleagues, and what issues does it provide to them. And hopefully it may find its way into your constituent authorities, district and boroughs, just as a conversation for awareness. And there is an offer there if anybody wants me to come to their local or constituent authority, city, county or district. I'm happy to come, and I'm sure Damien and Mick will be equally articulate in terms of the conversation to make sure that people understand the gravity of what we face. So the report is there really just to put it out there that we are dealing with it. National Fire Chiefs Council, we will look to do a Grenfell tracker phase 2, so where recommendations are approved, are agreed, are expected, there'll be a national thing, and my understanding is that will feed back into the Fire Minister and Home Secretary probably as well, depending on our government structure in terms of fire in the future, so that make sure that all fire and rescue services are looking to work towards to make sure we secure the safety of people that live in and around and use the buildings that we've got. So, Chair, that's all I've got to say on that one, really.
Thank you very much. Chief, are there any comments or questions in relation to this report? Councillor Rain and then Councillor Lee.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, thanks to Chief. I'd echo this is quite sombre looking at this, and I think obviously we remember the people who lost their lives or were injured, and then the firefighters who went in. It must have been a scarring experience for people, to say the least. I mean, it's a scarring experience, I think, for the entire country watching it unfold on the television. And to be honest with you, I still think it's a source of national shame, because that fire happened in a tower full of very poor people that had been marginalised, that been given materials that weren't rectified due to financial consideration. Money's reigning more than it is the consideration for the human life, if we're honest. If you look at the percentages that have been quoted on the buildings that have been rectified with that cladding, it's about 29% nationally. Given the time span, I think that's shameful. I think it's absolutely horrendous that politicians or whoever else in London have not funded councils or whoever else it is, fire services, to remove that cladding. And as we speak now, people are living in buildings that potentially the same thing could happen again. So we do hear a lot of hot words, and I'm being blunt about this sometimes down in Parliament, but we're not seeing as much action as we could do. And this is obviously costing an horrific amount of money. We should be looking into it properly, but it is shameful that it's not been rectified, I think. It's also shameful that there's people not just living in them, but there are people whose lives have been ruined, who now have got properties that weren't told about this, who then, just for the thing to be rectified, it's costing them it's practically going to bankrupt them in terms of their flats. I know a lot of this is in London, and also it must be a real fear for people who are living in town blocks at the moment. People aren't sure if you're thinking of buying a flat or you're going into student accommodation, or many of the buildings that have sprung up around Nottingham. Some of the public are quite fearful. I don't think they actually know whether their buildings are safe. Obviously, we're sure that as a body that they are, but what concerns me is how long this has been dragging on. I mean, I don't know in terms of the priorities of sorting it, because I know what the Chief's saying about local authorities, but I mean, in terms of the money local authorities have got, I'm not trying to make a political point, but we're absolutely starved. If we were to, we're struggling to house people at the moment. Homelessness is practically bankrupt in our council, and that's not different, I don't think, for most cities around the country. So that is a plea for money. I really do think that people in Westminster and so on, when they look at this, need to think about the fact this tragedy was caused, in my opinion, partly by valuing money and profit above people, and that we seem to be often be replicating that, and we're not rectifying it. And I think that honestly is, I don't know how to put it, a source of national shame that hasn't been rectified, to be honest with you. And it's been left to us to try and do something about. So sorry if that's a bit harsh, Chief, but that's how I feel.
Thank you, Councillor Ray.
You know, my job is to advise you as a chief officer. Your job is to hold me to account and scrutinise me and give me your view so you can steer me about what I'm going to do on your behalf, Councillor. I think there is a reality is about the context of what you're talking about there. If people want more context and they don't want to read lots of things, what I'd sort of say is go onto BBC Radio, the podcasts. There was a journalist, Kate Lamble, who followed the inquiry all the way through. And I think she released something like a 10-part podcast. There was one that was all the way through, but there is a sort of a 10-parter that's a couple of 3 hours long. And if you want to pick up things and get context, it talks about local authority, talks about government deregulation, regulation. It's she picked on very, very clever about how she's done that kind of podcast, and it just gives members probably a little bit more easier listening around the context around what the issues have led up to this. So when Grenfell was built as a construction, it was designed that the fire would stay in the room of origin. But along the way, different management companies, tenant management organisation, design failures, everybody looking for everybody else. I mean, the council Upton talked about building regulation, approved document B has not been reviewed as part of what we would look to deal with a lot of the time. They have not been dealt with and kept up the pace. But they've taken a building that in its day was built safe given how people were living in it, how it was designed, and then giving it a facelift and basically put something like 5 litres of petrol per every square metre on the outside. So a firefighter goes in there to a fridge fire that, having done that in high-rise buildings myself, they invariably, when I look at Lenton Flats, which was my sort of ground where I learned, they very rarely went out the room of origin. The worst they did was broke out the window and may have caught the window upstairs to give us some concern. Now they're spreading up just like a chimney unchecked. So there's some really serious questions to ask, and I hope at some point all people that need to be held to account are held to account. And I quote Martin Moore-Bigg, systematic dishonesty. It's not my view. I'm reading an inquiry that's took 5 years that's come to that opinion. And what I can do is deal with what we have here in terms of the training of staff, knowledge and understanding the buildings. I think we've got something like 22, as we class as high-risk buildings, that have got particular operational information notes on them. Some of those with cladding, some of them not with cladding, but they have their own specific issues. So it is complex, like we said earlier, it's very complex. Funding and regulation in terms of local authority, I accept, is clearly part of it.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Councillor Ray. Councillor Lee.
Thank you. I've read some of the report. I'm not going to pretend I've read all of it. What was telling for me is medium and low-rise buildings haven't been really looked at in the report, not really commented on. And we know that in this area, medium and low and level buildings have this cladding. We know across the country they have this cladding, but this is not something that's been commented on because they've concentrated, rightfully or wrongfully, on the style of building like Grenfell. What are we doing to have a look at the medium and low level buildings that we know are in our area?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. In terms of these premises, you're absolutely right. The focus has understandably in that risk-based approach been about high-rise residential buildings over 18 metres and then between 11 and 18 metres. There are a number of premises below 11 metres that fall into these categories in terms of those. Now we are inspecting those systematically through our risk-based inspection programme. We have a regular meeting with the fire protection team, a really highly qualified, very aware of the issues around us in terms of our fire engineering capabilities, but also our fire inspection capabilities, and we are addressing them through our risk-based inspection programme. I think one of the challenges that the Councillor Ray touches on is the funding for remediation, and currently that is funded through government grants, through Homes England, for buildings of 18 metres. They can apply to that remediation grant. That doesn't exist as clearly for buildings under 11 metres. So there are continuing challenges around remediation in those, but we're working with responsible people. We're working with local authorities very, very closely to make sure we continually inspect those and then oversee the remediation. And as the Chief Officer says, where required, we do have those powers to act either through enforcement or prohibition to make sure people stay safe. So it's a very, very complex environment at the moment. I think it will be for the foreseeable, but we'll continue to work really focused on that area.
And are you aware of any of the more local authority buildings?
As in under local authority ownership? I'd have to check specifically. I say if we are, we would address those exactly the same as we would with any owner, and we will work with the responsible person to make sure that the correct remediation or correct risk mitigation is taken. Off the top of my head, I don't know. Definitely find out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Vice Chair and then Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's horrific that 72 people needlessly lost their life through the tragedy. Many from marginalised communities, and obviously people putting profit over people. I would ask, actually, Chair, in your capacity as MP, to actually push the national government to actually address this as quickly as possible, because this has been going on far too long now. And we think of those that have been affected as a result of it. Even now, we see on the TV individuals, not necessarily in our area, around the country, who have got apartments that the developers still haven't addressed the issue around cladding. And then the other issue is around how we actually get planning and building control to work with the fire and rescue agencies to ensure that new buildings that they're actually going to build are actually take that also into consideration. So I guess I'm asking you in your role as an MP to do what you can to actually help addressing this matter.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair. And I think, you have my assurance that I will continue to press the government, but I think, to be fair to the incoming government, to the Prime Minister, we are pushing at a relatively open door. The Prime Minister has made this a personal commitment. He's been crystal clear that, and there were survivors, family members in the public gallery in the Commons when he gave his statement. It was a very, very powerful statement. He gave an apology on behalf of the British state, which I think was quite right. He was very clear that this is a failure in terms of deregulation that stretches beyond the previous government, albeit the previous government made some very serious mistakes, ignoring some of the issues around building regulation that Councillor Upton powerfully spoke about earlier. But there were governments prior to the previous government as well that made mistakes. So this has been a failure of the British state. He apologised for that. He apologised for the people who needlessly lost their lives and the families who are still living with the trauma and the people who had to respond on the day. He said that the government will give its full support to assisting predominantly the Metropolitan Police, but also prosecutors in bringing those people to book and to justice who are culpable. And there's a process obviously to run through in terms of that. But he's also crystal clear that this is a personal mission for him. On Councillor Rain's point and the point you've made and others have made, he also said in the House of Commons that this is not progressing quickly enough, nowhere near quickly enough in terms of removal of this dangerous material. And as the Chief said, we have still got people living in this country with essentially solidified petrol on the outside exterior of their homes. So the other commitment you made, which I think was important in response to, I think what the Chief said is a really, really powerful, diligent, methodical report by Sir Martin Morbick and his colleagues, is that the House will continue to be regularly updated and hold to account the government on every individual recommendation made in the second phase of the report. And I think the test really will be on delivery now. We've had the words, we've had the response, we've had the soul searching in terms of the report. The test will now be about delivery, and I know there are a number of people, not only myself obviously with my hat on as Chair of the Fire Authority here, and the chief will be pressing me, in his role through the National Fire Chiefs Council to raise this, but some of my colleagues, one of my colleagues, Joe Powell MP, who is the Member of Parliament for the area where this happened, and he has consistently raised this issue since he was elected in the House, and I know will continue to, and he's got the support of me and other colleagues in doing that. So, you're right to raise this, Vice Chair. Colleagues across the authority here is right to raise it, and it's absolutely crystal clear that it's imperative that we get this issue resolved, because at the moment there are far too many people who live in the country who are still seriously at risk of this incident being repeated. And there were incidents actually before, colleagues in this room will know far better than I do, who work in the fire service, there were incidents before Grenfell where lessons weren't learned actually that were of similar nature to this, where people lost their lives across the country. So yeah, I think you're right to press this, Vice Chair, and I'll certainly do what I can from my perspective. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Similar thing is trying to, I don't think the 2 bullet points, that we need to add something in there. We're speaking to the people in Nottingham, asking for, for more urgency in this, because it's gone on. I don't know, it's so complicated, as you were saying, there's thousands of pages where 7 years where we don't seem to have moved a great deal forward, and that's not long in the last woman or any woman. It's so complicated, because it'd be interesting, and you will be as firefighters, have we banned plastics on the refrigerators and things like that? So I think 90% of the refrigerators that are made still got a hell of a lot of plastics on the inflammable. So just, if we could add something on behalf of all the people of this county and the city, that could come and really express some urgency. I think, when the Prime Minister stood there, he was absolutely sincere. I think the House was sincere. But it's adding that extra bullet point from this authority, these members in here who represent that area, calling for more urgency so we can get something done. And Nick was saying that, substantial amount of buildings are still not even started. And people that financially have bought places and they're losing out because they can't sell it. And other people are still in danger 24 hours a day, as are our people we employ. So I'd like a third bullet point somewhere around those comments.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I think that's really important. So I think there's something about, and I'm thinking off the top of my head here, members agreeing to endorse and support the Chief and Chair in making national representations in relation to the urgency of the response needed to the Grenfell inquiry report and the recommendations that are within it, some sort of wording around that, which then shows that the authority's got a consensus on this that is supportive of the various different roles that Craig obviously has as Chief Fire Officer, discharging his responsibility here, but also the role he has in the National Fire Chiefs Council, and obviously my role as Chair of the Authority, but also as a Member of Parliament. We'll find some way of wording that in a way that makes sure that it reflects that the Authority feels very strongly about this.
Thank you.
Chief?
Yeah, I just wanted to chair on that recommendation. The Chair in his announcements talked about the accelerated remediation letter that's come from the Minister, whether it, and from the Deputy Prime Minister, actually. I wonder if there's something as a response in your position and my position, we respond on behalf of the Fire Authority to that, laying out some of the concerns that you still have as members of the Fire Authority and representing your local constituents. Maybe that is the way to do it. Yeah. I certainly think from our perspective, in terms of what can be more done, the letter is strong and as a couple of pages is long. It's not telling me what my additional powers actually are. I think it's really just sort of saying they want assurances that we're actually using our powers. And again, HMI have also sort of said about how much enforcement you're doing or not doing as a fire authority. But of course we can do a lot more enforcement, but we apply the enforcement management model through the fire safety order, which means that this criteria you can do X or not, where we're satisfied we're getting mitigations. So there is some challenge to that as well. But we can certainly write back and do that work.
Thank you. Okay. I'll move the recommendations. I think people have got the gist of the third recommendation points. I'll move those recommendations. Somebody have to second those. They're seconded. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? Thank you, colleagues, for your contributions to what was a really important report. Thank you to the Chief for presenting the report. The next item is item 12, which is the exclusion of the public. So it's to consider excluding the public from the meeting during consideration of the remaining items in accordance with section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972 under Schedule 12A Part 1, Paragraph 3, on the basis that, having regard to all the circumstances, the public interest in maintaining an exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. I'll move the recommendation. Somebody happy to second that? Is that agreed, colleagues? I'll ask